Good morning. Good morning, Tony. I see you. Good morning, Jermaine. I see you, brother. Good morning, Kurt. I see you. Good morning, Paul. I see you. That happens to be the greeting that I give to the men every morning at Pivot when we circle up. I make it a point to call their name and then to acknowledge their presence. Good morning, Kevin. I see you. It's my way of encouraging them for the day. Encouragement is something I think we all need. We never know what a person is going through. We never know what space they're in. As a matter of fact, a few weeks ago, Paul showed us a video clip that highlighted the fact that we all have stories. We all have life challenges. We all go through things. And perhaps, just perhaps, a little encouragement will make a difference. I love Hebrews 3:13. Paul reminds us to encourage one another daily, as long as it is today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. Man, we're called to encourage one another. We're called to have each other's back. We're called to guard one another from sin. I'm real familiar with the space that my Pivot brothers are in. It's the same space I was in 12 years ago before I came to Pivot, following 23 years of crazy drug addiction. There's a picture that's going to come up in just a moment. That picture was taken September the 6th, 2007, the day before I came to Pivot. That was my driver's license. It's kind of difficult to see, but I can tell you what it's a picture of. It's a picture of loneliness. It's a picture of helplessness, unworthiness, uncertainty, shame, and guilt. It's a place where not many people see you. Even when you're there, you're almost invisible. I remember that space very clearly, and boy, could I have used some encouragement. So this morning, I'm here to tell you my story, my faith journey, my hope. It's not a complicated story. As a matter of fact, it's a pretty familiar one. It parallels the prodigal son in many ways. A story of bad choices, selfishness, hopelessness, but also a story of forgiveness, restoration, and new life. But first, let me share a little bit about my family to give some context to where I've come from. I was born and raised in Annapolis, Maryland. Go Naval Academy, right? That was my playground as a little kid. I was one of the happiest kids in the world. I was raised by both parents in a Christian household. We did this Sunday morning worship thing every week. I did Sunday school every Sunday. I'm one of 13 children. I'm number 12. I have an identical twin brother. He and I are the youngest of the clan. Lots of love in my household. My parents provided a really healthy living space. We were all close and supportive of one another. Lots of people and lots of love to go around. As a matter of fact, my reference of love is my family. It's what love is, and it's what love looks like to me. Just the simple dynamics in my family. We cared for each other. We protected one another. We loved one another. Now, I'll say it wasn't without fault. We weren't the Cleavers, but we were a regular family who just loved one another. My dad, hard worker, taught me good work ethics, taught me how to be responsible. He provided for the family, worked every day. He was really big on education. Ironically, he never went to school. He had to work the fields as a young kid. But he did learn to read at the age of 54. I remember still helping him with his schoolwork. I was 10 years old, helping my dad to learn to read. His words to me were often, you want to get a good education, son. You don't want to be digging ditches all your life like me. He was a good dad, even with his faults. My mother, special woman, as all mothers are, right? But I have to say my mother was really special. Everyone knew her. She had a heart as big as the universe. Everyone called her Big Mama. That's right. My mother was a Big Mama. You may be familiar with that term of endearment. It's a term in the African American culture that some women, grandmothers and mothers, are given. A Big Mama is that grandmother or mother in the town who loves and takes care of everyone. If you're hungry, Big Mama feeds you. If you're homeless, Big Mama gives you shelter. If you need clothes, Big Mama gives you clothes. If you have some personal issues and need someone to talk to, Big Mama gives a listen. Even if you're short paying a bill, Big Mama will help you out. Need a babysitter? Big Mama's the one to call. I think you get the picture. And it wasn't the size of the tasks that she did. It was the size of her heart. She was a Big Mama. She was there to help everyone. She was there to love her family, and she had plenty of love to go around. My mother was a Big Mama, and that's what everyone called her. There's an old African proverb that says, it takes a village to raise a child. You may have heard that. Well, I say, it takes a Big Mama to raise a village. Amen? Amen? And my mother raised a village. My house was ministry central all while I was growing up. I was in the center of what unconditional love is and what it looked like. Now, despite that good report, there were some challenges for me and my siblings while we were growing up. But I'll just focus on me. For me, the biggest I remember was being teased a lot and being made to feel less than. Coming from a big family, our economy was different from a lot of my friends. We didn't have a lot of things. We didn't have a lot of money. But I know my parents provided the best for me. I never thought of my family as poor. But I was called that quite often by other people, sometimes made to feel different. Even in high school. I was in high school in the 70s. You can even think about the cultural climate in the 70s. I remember meeting with my high school guidance counselor, and I told her I wanted to go to college. Her reply to me was, college? Richard, I think you're not college material. Perhaps you should think about doing something else. Those are the kind of remarks that simply reinforced what I was beginning to feel growing up already. Less than, different, not good enough. And this was at an early age. But despite what so many were telling me, what I couldn't do or what I couldn't be, there was that part of me that was determined to prove them all wrong. It only fueled and motivated me to do something with my life. So with the help of some other teachers, I did apply for college. My parents sacrificed in a big way, and off I went. My twin brother and I to Maryland University, College Park. We were the first of the 13 to ever go to college. Big sacrifice. I graduated from Maryland U in 1981, special education. Landed a great job teaching in the Maryland, D.C. area. Feeling good, helping others. Maybe it was that big mama syndrome going on. But even after all that hard work, I still felt it and I wasn't good enough. A few years later, I landed a great job with the D.C. Superior Court. I was deputy clerk to the Register of Wills of the District of Columbia. An amazing job. At 27 years old, a grade 13 in the U.S. government. The youngest at the time, the youngest grade 13 in the whole D.C. court system at the time. Position, status, money. I had all the niceties of life. I was able to buy my first home. I felt like I was living the American dream. By most definitions, I had made it. But it still wasn't enough. I still had that drive for more success, more material wealth, more status. It was all about me and proving those folk wrong. When I look back at it now, I can see there was a real self-esteem issue going on. That drive to succeed shortly manifested into selfishness and arrogance, pride, entitlement. I began to judge people the same way I was judged. In a way, I had become like my persecutors, callous and cold, self-absorbed. This is about the same time that drugs came into play. Working in the courthouse, most of my friends were attorneys and law clerks. I was a 13 and all my friends were 13s and above. We'd go out to happy hour and we'd go out to party and I was feeling like I was part of the in crowd. We'd go out every weekend. I was living pretty large. It was one of those weekends that I used cocaine for the very first time. I was out partying with my friends and I saw one of my attorney friends snorting cocaine. Of course, me, this is my culture now. This is what we do when we make it. And I asked him, could I try it? That was my first time doing cocaine. First time, no big deal. So I thought. For a long while, I only used on Saturday nights when I went out partying with my friends. It was all just to have a good time. No harm done. Getting high was restricted to only Saturdays. As a matter of fact, I didn't even think about drugs during the week. I guess it was probably about a year later, within a year, I was using cocaine whenever I went out to party, not just Saturdays. And eventually, that led to using cocaine in the daytime, even at work. I guess probably within the course of 2 to 3 years, I was getting high every day, all day. From one line to Saturday nights only, to every night, to all day. It had a grip on me. For a long time, I denied the addiction, and I worked really hard to maintain the image. It was important to keep that image. The spirit of pride refused to let me even consider that I was in a bad space. You see, I'd become so prideful. I had created in my mind this imaginary boardroom, and I was the chairman of the board, and I refused to give up my seat. Even as my life fell apart, when those things hit me as a result of drugs, I remember saying to myself, I'm still on the board. I'm still on the board. I'm still the chairman of the board. The more I denied what was happening, the deeper I sank into addiction. As most stories goes, I eventually lost my home, the job, everything I'd worked for, I got to the point I couldn't even keep a job. So I started waiting tables. Easy cash money every day. I'd become a slave to the drugs. They dictated my life. When to eat, when to sleep, when to go, when to come. By this time, drugs was my world. Everyone I associated with, all of my friends, my entire circle of influence were drug users. That's where it got to. I remember thinking, wow, this is my final destiny. After 23 years of addiction, that's the guy. That's the guy. In the process, I'd hurt a lot of people who trusted me and believed in me. Many of my relationships were casualties to this addiction. Not to mention my family. Remember that place? The addiction had become so bad. When I went home, I would steal from my family. I lied about everything. No one trusted me. It was all about me, getting what I could get. Eventually, I began getting messages from my family. They didn't want me around them. I disappointed my parents who'd worked so hard. Both of them lived to be 93 years old. Sadly, the last 23 years of their lives was scarred with my addiction and littered with my dishonesty. They both passed away while I was still in my mess. My life was a wreck. It had become unmanageable, and I was in a desperate place, didn't know what to do, didn't know where to go. Then there was that resounding echo again. They were all right. They were all right all along. You'll never be nothing. You're not worth anything. You will amount to nothing. That's what it led to. September 2007. That's when the moment came. The moment when I came to myself. The moment I realized how desperate I'd become and that I needed help. It was one night after I'd just gotten high. I was so depressed. I remember just calling out, God, please help me. I give up my seat on the board. It was after that I had the strength to call my sister, who wanted nothing to do with me. And I told her I needed some help. She reached out to an outreach center. And that's how I learned about Pivot Ministries. I recall my desperation, admitting I'm willing to do whatever I need to do to live again. I'm ready. 3 days later, I was on a bus heading to Connecticut. I can still recall the 8-hour bus ride, praying all the way. I arrived at Pivot at 12 o'clock, midnight, September the 7th. When I arrived there, I faced yet another fear. You see, after so many years of addiction, part of my captivity were these recurring nightmares and violent dreams that I would have when I didn't get high in a couple of days. You see, I know that was Satan's grip on me. I stayed high to avoid the dreams. I've been clean for 3 days since that call to the outreach center. I got there and I was afraid of going to sleep that night. So I just planned to stay awake all night long. They'd never know. The brothers checked me in, they did my intake, and then they laid hands on me, and a couple of the brothers prayed for me. That night, I did fall asleep. And I woke up the next morning without incident. No dreams, no nightmares, no violent episode. And I just laid there for a while. And then I turned my head and I looked out the window and I saw the morning blue sky. That was the same morning blue sky that was usually my cue to get up and go and get the next hit. But something was different. I didn't feel a desire to get up. I didn't feel a desire to go and get high. It was a new and a strange feeling. So I just laid there and I wept. I believe that night was the spiritual turning point of my journey. It was for the first time in many years that I even had a glimpse of hope. It's been 12 years since that night, and I haven't used any drugs, and I haven't had any crazy dreams. To God be the glory. So at Pivot, we read the Bible and we attend Bible studies every day. Even growing up in a Christian household, this was culture shock. I mean, it was like every day, Bible, Bible, Bible. But out of pure obedience, I read the Bible, although I didn't quite understand what it was meaning or what it was saying. I just read it out of obedience. In about my third month at Pivot, we were reading and studying the story of Joseph. As one of the brothers was reading the scripture, there was this sudden clarity of what he was reading. Then there was this heavy emotion that came over me. I just started weeping uncontrollably. I'm sure the guys in the class probably thought I was crazy or back on drugs again. But I couldn't stop crying. I could feel the word of God coming alive in me. And there was a new understanding that was happening, a new hope and a new joy. There's a second one. That's it. I wish you guys could see it. There is a remarkable difference. But that's the joy. There was even a smile on there for a change, right? Yeah. Hope and joy. I completed Pivot in 2008, and I committed to the executive director at that time that I would give back 3 months. My plan was to give back and then go back home. I could always teach. I had my education degree. But God had a different plan. Within the first 30 days as a staff, the executive director at that time offered me the position of reentry house supervisor. The reentry house is the independent living phase of the program. I supervised that program for 2 years. And then I was offered the position of assistant program director. And then a couple years later, I was offered the position of director. I continued to serve and to be an example of the men. I felt this was the calling. I was beginning to understand who I was and what God wanted of me. And as I developed spiritually and began to walk in God's promises and trust him, he began to widen my territory. Most of you are aware how Pivot travels from church to church. Even as a student, every time I went to Stanwich, there was a stirring in my spirit. There was just a lifting. After I graduated, I continued to attend that church. In 2012, I felt this draw to join Stanwich Church. Now, I have to admit, at the moment, that seemed kind of crazy. I even said to God, God, have you seen them? And have you seen me? But at this point in my journey, I had learned obedience. I had learned obedience to follow what God wanted of me. So I joined the church. A couple of years after joining Stanwich, I served a while, and then I was nominated to serve on the church's elder board. Little old me, an elder at Stanwich Congregational Church. God was calling me to serve in even a bigger capacity. I served on that board for 2 years, and even today, I'm what we call a pastoring elder at Stanford campus. When I became an elder, the church wanted a picture for the elders directory, and that was the picture. That picture hung in the halls of Stanwich Church, Greenwich, Connecticut. It was also posted in the elders directory of Stanwich Church. So my journey wasn't just about changing my behavior. It was about changing my heart. From death to life. From selfishness to servanthood. Christ gave me a new life to breathe his life into the world and to live a life of service. In 2015, I was ordained as a minister of the gospel. And just last year, I was appointed executive director of the very ministry that changed my life. It's a position of service. It's a position of humility. A position that I'm very grateful for. It's been an amazing journey, and God has done great things. My family has been restored. My personal relationships have been restored. Many wounds have been healed. And I'm more certain of who I am today and whose I am, more importantly. I'm no longer the same guy that you saw in that first picture. The word says, the old shall pass away. Behold, all things will become new. At Pivot, I have the best seat in the house. I get to see God move every day. Thank you for listening, man. God bless you.